I wanted to reflect on 2024 and talk about 2025 and where this is going. Wise fools is this concept that we are fools, those of us who put our trust in Jesus, because the world looks at us like we're fools, and yet we're wise because we're trusting in the wisest man to walk on this earth and the one that makes us wise, which is Jesus Christ. And it has been so encouraging this previous year to have people on who imitate Jesus and have shared so many stories, and also just the way that God has really blessed me in this journey. So in the beginning of the year in 2024, I wanted to start this journey, and God did something amazing. I was considering who I was having on the podcast, and then I realized that there were two people on my list, Ken and Martyn Iles, who were coming to Australia for a tour. And I remembered that I had a good friend, Dan, who was working for Answers in Genesis. He was about to start his new role with them, but he'd already moved away to Brisbane. And I really felt like I need to step out and ask him whether he'll be able to talk to Martyn and Ken to get them on the podcast. So it would have been a couple weeks into January, and I thought to myself, well, I can't just message him. Like, I need to call him and ask him, but I'll wait until he kind of eases into the year, at least his first couple of weeks of work. I don't want to put pressure on him and call him straight away. And so it was a Monday, and I decided to go pick up a bed from a place in Canberra, which I never go to. And my wife said, get some cash out at the service station nearby where you're picking up this bed. And I thought, oh, okay, I was going to get it out at the local 7-Eleven, but I'll go get it from there. So as I drove there, I went to this service station and I went to pull money out. And then I turned around, and standing right there was Dan. And I said to Dan, what are you doing here? What are you doing here, Dan? And he said, oh, I'm just here. We've just driven from Melbourne. We're on our way to Brisbane. We had Christmas holidays with the family. And now I've just got a medical appointment. I'm just having a drink of water. I've got to guzzle like a whole lot of water before the appointment. I said, Dan, you don't understand. You've been on my mind pretty much 24/7 about asking you this question to have Martyn and Ken on the podcast whilst they're here in Australia. And I think he started to sense, okay, this is from God. And he said, all right, Ciaran, I'll speak to them. And so I waited and I waited. And he got back to me and he said, yeah, Martyn and Ken would love to be on the podcast. I later found out that Dan was telling them that it was definitely a huge priority. So thank you so much, Dan. You're a legend. And then what happened was I was able to interview Ken online. But this is the funny thing. The first time I recorded, the audio completely failed. Everything wrong that could go wrong went wrong. But the amazing thing was this really showed Ken's character, but also God's favor, and that I requested to do the interview again. And he turned around and just said, yep, let's do the same time next week. Now, Ken has a lot on his plate. His ministry reaches 30 million people across the world. 1 million people alone visit the Ark. He's a busy man. He's running this organization. But he made time to do the podcast again, and that was my first ever episode, which I launched on my birthday to celebrate. God was showing his favor, and the second recording was way better than the first. It was way more natural, and I really enjoyed it. And then I flew to Adelaide, and I actually went to Ken and Martyn's event, and they so graciously gave me front row tickets, which I didn't expect. And it was such a good event. Everything they were saying just aligned so well with the issues of our day and speaking into those issues. And then I was able to interview Martyn the day after in a hotel room that Dan helped book. And I had a whole team of guys, shout out to the crew in Adelaide, particularly Henry and James, who helped me set that up. And we walked in and we had this podcast discussion with my friend Jonathan, and it was so much fun. And that podcast ended up doing quite well. It's reached about 2,000 people now, but more importantly, the watch time is really good, which shows that it really spoke to certain people, and really felt like I built a friendship with Martyn and was able to learn more about, just the importance of connecting with people. And yeah, God's just amazing. He's shown so much favor. And then from there, the year started to really get into it, and I started to get very busy. I started to get quite overwhelmed, and I really feel like I didn't make the progress I wanted to. And there are many reasons as to why that is, but one huge reason was just trying to do it in my own strength and really not depending on God and just trusting in his timing. But soon after, I got to have my good friend Jordan Lester, who was a US Army Lieutenant Colonel, And most notably, he worshipped in a war zone. He sung worship songs on a rooftop to the Lord at Easter in Afghanistan, of all places. And he's a good friend of mine. He's part of our local church community. I've seen his humility and his character. But we got to talk about servant leadership. Man, I learned a lot. I applied those things in my own job in leadership, and they have really helped. He also spoke around so many topics around commitment, and I really believe that podcast will bless a lot of people. So if you haven't had a chance, go and look at that one. And then from there, I thought, okay, 3 podcasts for the year, pretty slow going, but I'm going to keep trusting you, God. And we headed into 2025. Oh, sorry, no, I forgot. It was 2024, and I had one of my podcast guests reach out to me. I do know he's Jonathan's father, Chris Brohier, and he just said, "Oh, I'm in Canberra. Let's catch up." I thought, "Oh, he's in Canberra. Okay, let's make this work." And I said, "Hey, can we film a podcast while you're here?" And so I had Naomi and Peter generously help me set that up. My guys that helped me film Jordan couldn't do it, and the only time that Chris had was an early morning on a Friday, and they happened to be available. So I was so grateful God provided so we could do that podcast. And he's running for Senate in government, but he's also stood up a lot for the unborn, and again, recently more against gender ideology. So that's going to be coming out soon. And that conversation was such a blessing. We had such a good laugh. It really encouraged me and emboldened me. And then we headed into 2025. And man, it has been a start. It is the 20th of January. And God has shown that I should continue to do this and that he's going to provide. And so to kick off the year, it was the 2nd of January. I was out in Murrumbateman, which is a small town outside of Canberra. I was sitting there minding my own business, working from home on a Friday, and I was really struggling to focus on my job. So I got distracted, I must be honest, and I started looking at my podcast lists for the year. And I created this list about 6 months ago, and I thought, Lord, how am I going to do this? I'm just feeling overwhelmed. Where should I start? How do I approach guests to have them on? Probably even really doubting what I was doing. And I look up from my computer in this cafe that I've never been to before. I don't even know why I went out to Murrumbateman, but now I know why. And there was one of the podcast guests sitting in front of me having a coffee. I couldn't believe it. I started laughing because it was just so out there. And I approached him. It was Shavura, and he was so humble. I just told him, look, I believe this is from God. And he said, well, look, when we didn't do it, let's do it. And so that was the Friday. By the Monday, we'd filmed the podcast. And getting into the year, I just thought, I've got some momentum here. And I felt really confident. God just kept providing and providing and providing. And since then, and I won't say his name, but I have a friend who came to me, and I felt God had said to me at the start of the year, Ciaran, you need to ask this friend how they want to be part of the podcast. And I thought, how they want to be part of the podcast? And I'd actually suppressed this thought for quite a few months because I thought, I don't want to co-host. I don't know how that's going to work. Probably being a bit selfish, to be honest. But in this moment in the new year, I just said, Lord, I'm going to surrender. I'm going to surrender to you and your will and what you want to do. And so I felt God would say to me that I needed to ask him how he wanted to be part of the podcast. So I asked him that question, and he turned to me and he said, straight away, I'll tell you in a couple of days. I thought, what? I didn't even expect him to have an answer. But then he said, actually, you know what, I'll tell you now. It's too obvious that God's, speaking to me as well. And I thought, oh, what's he going to say? And he turned around and he just said, God's told me to pay for all of your podcast gear for a home setup. You see, this whole journey, I haven't had any of my own gear, apart from this mic. I've been depending on other people, which has been fantastic. I'm so appreciative of the way God's provided. But he just said, you need a home setup, and God's been speaking to me about providing for that. And he was bringing it to my mind all day until you then asked me this question. This is all within the space of the first week or so of January to start the year. And so God has been providing for this podcast. And then more recently, being able to have on a guest who's coming up as well, Victoria, who's a former OnlyFans recruiter. I felt very led to begin to make daily videos talking about how to overcome porn addiction and to share my story. And that's really carried some momentum and really resonated with some people. And it's the 20th of January. It's only just starting. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been on that journey. Thank you for those who have helped me do this. Thank you for those that have shared it with other people and have told me stories of how it's encouraged them and encouraged others. And if you're new on the journey as well, come for the ride. I think that God is going to do some amazing things this year, and I'm trusting him to do that. My heart for this podcast is I really believe this is a call from God. I see this as a ministry. I see this as a platform to share the gospel and for young men particularly to receive wisdom, ultimately the wisdom of salvation, and to grow and overcome the things that are trapping them and enslaving them in their life, like he did for me. And I don't think it's by mistake that I turn 30 this year. I'm 30 years old. I'm married. I've got a beautiful daughter. I'm leading in my workplace and in church. And I feel like God is saying, Ciaran, I've fed you a lot. You're quite overweight, literally as well, but that's not the point he's trying to make. You need to give out. You need to give out and use your voice. And so that's what I'm doing, but I'm also bringing on some other really great guests who can come on board. So if you want to make any suggestions of who you'd love on the podcast, what topics you'd like me to cover, don't be afraid to comment. Don't be afraid to follow me on Instagram and shoot me a message. I'd love to get to know you, whoever you are, whether I know you or I don't. But I really believe that God is going to do good things. But I've realized what's most important in all of this is to depend on God. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could join me for a moment, I'm actually going to pray over this channel, over this podcast, and I'd love you to join me in praying. Father, I just thank you that you are so faithful, that you were faithful to me as a young man who was so trapped and enslaved, and you freed me. You helped me overcome slavery to lust. You've helped me overcome crippling things in my life. You've healed me and restored me. And Lord, you've grown me. You've given me a beautiful wife, a beautiful daughter, great friends, a great church. And you've given me an opportunity to use this platform to speak to people who are in that same place that I once was. So I just pray this year, Lord, that you would open the right doors and that you would have the right people come on board. Lord, that you would anoint my words, that they would penetrate. I know that you're the one that reaches people. It's not me, Lord. I know that it's you that is able to save people. So I pray that this would be a way to sow seeds and shower, but I ask for people to come to know you through this podcast. I pray, Lord, that you would really just keep providing for me. I just thank you so much. You've already provided so much, Lord. I just pray that in those moments where I doubt you, that I would just come back to the truth and I would not let the enemy deceive me or overwhelm me, but come back to that truth that this is what you've called me to do, and whatever obstacles come my way, that by trusting in you, that I can overcome those things, and you have ultimately overcome the evil one for me, Jesus, and I can trust in you. So bless those that are watching, bless everyone that's part of this community, and I just pray more and more that there would be wise fools, those that are willing to be foolish according to the world, but wise in your eyes, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians, and that we would be unashamedly sharing the gospel, living the gospel out. And just thank you for your faithfulness, Lord. Just help me to stay focused, to stay humble, and to stay dependent. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you guys. Make sure you subscribe, follow along. I'd love your support. And it's going to be a great year.